the world has realized that the United States is no longer this stabilizing force. It's become a force of chaos.
Hello and welcome back to The Focus. Today we'll be speaking with returning guest by popular demand, Dr. Roy Casagranda. Today's topic will be on Trump 47 over 100 days in. Has Trump permanently altered America's trajectory strategically, economically and politically? Is he the fourth dimensional chess player we all need? Or, as others might say, just a complete and utter corrupt incompetent who will destroy what's left of America's international reputation? Let's dive in. Roy, welcome back to The Focus.
Thank you so much for having me back.
Roy, with over 150 executive orders signed in the first 100 days, how do you interpret this aggressive use of executive power? Does it signify effective leadership or a bypassing of democratic processes?
Yeah, it's totally the latter. I was hesitating because the United States has had a history of executive orders. The first president to issue them was George Washington, so we've always done it. The idea behind executive orders, usually for the most part, was there are times when Congress has passed legislation, it's vague. Somebody needed to get in there and interpret it for the cabinet so that the cabinet could execute the law. That's generally what we expect it to be. Other times it's been stuff as frivolous as under President Ford, when they would pass out papers during a meeting, they would start with the president and then they'd go to the vice president and they do it by rank. So the person is running around the room like an idiot, going from one and skipping all these people in the middle. And Ford said, "This is absurd. We're going to start in the right front corner and work our way to the left back." And he made an executive order doing that. So the range can be really meaningful or really unmeaningful. And what Trump has done is he's used executive orders to try and bypass the Constitution and to legislate. And executive order after executive order is clearly unconstitutional. You could try to get into the weeds a little bit with FDR. FDR definitely had a history of pushing the boundary on what was legal with executive orders. And he issued a lot of executive orders. But I think in the case of FDR, you can make the excuse at least that we were in the middle of a crisis. The Great Depression wasn't exactly a good time in US history. And the nice thing about FDR was he did, even though he did mess with the Supreme Court a little bit, he did ultimately comply with the law, whereas Trump is just simply ignoring the courts. And so we do have a serious constitutional crisis underway with his executive orders.
You know, Trump has reversed some of his first-term policies as well, such as threatening the USMCA trade agreement with Canada and Mexico and reconsidering the state and local tax deduction cap. What does this say about his policy consistency and his political strategy?
So, the argument is that he's chaotic on purpose because that's part of his genius. The problem is what concessions are you getting in the process of this chaos? And there's no concessions that he's getting that are meaningful. He could have simply gone in and negotiated and sat down with our allies and worked out a deal. Instead, he plays this crazy game of I'm gonna threaten you and I'm gonna potentially wreck our economy in the threat, and then walks away with no meaningful gains on the other side. So if this is genius, we need to clearly wait a few more days, years, months, whatever, because I'm not seeing the fruits of the genius. In the case of the USMCA, the crazy thing about it is that that's his deal. It used to be called NAFTA. During Trump 1.0, he renegotiated the deal, walked away saying it's the greatest deal ever made. They basically updated NAFTA, and NAFTA needed updating. There was serious technological changes that happened since it had gone into effect, and so he tweaked an existing deal, called it the greatest deal ever made, and then in Trump 2.0 said it's the worst deal ever made. And
Yeah.
like what is that? It tells our allies, it tells everybody who's paying attention. Obviously, the people who've drunk the Kool-Aid won't notice, but it tells everybody that he's clueless and he doesn't know what's going on. He doesn't even recognize his own trade deal when he's negotiating. So it looks
Well,
like madness.
it does look like madness, and someone did say just the other day that Trump is now known for creating a crisis, tearing something to pieces, and then claiming victory as, he's the guy that brought sanity back, And it's like, well, if he's doing this deliberately to provoke the international community, only then to intervene and change midstream to make him look a little bit more reasonable, that does not seem like good policy to me. I don't know. I mean, has there been in US history a person of such chaotic demeanor? I know that you've had your share of bad presidents, but in terms of the history of things, where does Trump lie on the spectrum of bad
Yeah.
presidents?
So, if you look at 19th century presidents, there was one awful president after the other. The U.S. 19th century was really super corrupt. I think we've talked about this on a previous show.
Mm.
Um, One of the problems we had was how you voted was uh, public until we got
Yep.
the Australian ballot. So thanks for that
Yeah.
innovation. Yeah.
No worries.
And it meant that your employer could literally get up in front of the employees and go, "Guess what, guys? You're voting Republican." And if you
Mm.
didn't, you were fired because your employer would just simply look up how you voted.
Yep.
So the 19th century was corruption piled on top of corruption.
Mm.
But there was always, with some exceptions, there was always this like attempt at creating a veneer of we're doing something good at the end of the day. And I think in the case of Trump, he doesn't even pretend. He's not even trying to create the veneer.
Mm.
I say with some exceptions, like Chester Alan Arthur comes to mind. I don't think he tried to create a veneer of anything. He was dumb and corrupt. Um,
Yeah.
which is sad because he was a vice president for James Garfield, who was probably the smartest person ever elected to the presidency, if not the smartest, one of the smartest.
Mm.
And we shot him and killed him. So,
Mm.
because the A in USA stands for assassins. Um,
Mm.
we've murdered we've murdered 11% of our presidents so far, which that's
Yeah, it's kind of, yeah, bad.
a dangerous job.
Especially if you're competent. Oh, okay. So, reports seem to indicate significant changes within the Department of Justice, including dismissing officials involved in the January 6th investigations. How might these actions affect the rule of law and public trust in legal institutions?
So I think long term, public trust is obviously going to go away because I think the American public is seeing that if you're a friend of Trump, you're going to be okay.
Yeah.
If you give Trump a concession, he will pardon you from the most egregious crimes.
Mm.
And by contrast, if you did nothing wrong, you could be randomly deported to El Salvador.
Mm.
And to make things worse, right, one of the things that's happening now is as people are entering the United States who are U.S. citizens, they're not just being harassed; they're having their rights violated. And
Mm.
so recently, I believe it was two different immigrant attorneys entering the United States were harassed in this manner. So
Mm.
um, I think long term people are going to realize that the United States has become extremely corrupt. We've always had a fair amount of corruption. That I think there's this naive or Hollywood's idea of the United States as being this clean country. It never has been. There's always been background corruption, but there was at least an attempt to create a facade of a justice system in front of it. And the idea was that you had a chance at getting it right.
Mm.
There was no guarantee, but there was a chance. And everybody kind of understood the rich were always going to have a different legal system than everybody else. But now it doesn't even feel like the facade is there, and it doesn't feel like there's any attempt to try to get the random justice at the bottom end anymore. And so I think one of the legacies of Trump is he's going to create more cynicism. Nixon created a lot of cynicism, and the effect on the political system in the United States was very bad. It's taken us decades to end up with Trump. I mean, Trump
Mhm.
is in many
Yeah.
ways the grandchild of Nixon,
Mm.
and I feel like he's just going to continue down, can push us further and further down that path, which is disappointing.
It is indeed. All right, well, let's move on to global things, shall we? Considering Trump's transactional approach to international relations, how is his second term impacted long-standing alliances like NATO, especially in the Ukraine conflict?
Yeah. So one of the crazy things, of course, about his policies towards Ukraine is he made it very clear we were dumping Ukraine. And now all of a sudden he's reversed himself and it looks like, no, we're gonna help Ukraine, but they're gonna give us their rare earth metals.
Yeah.
Um, the insanity of all of this is that post World War II, the United States decided to recreate the earth in its own image.
Mm.
And the idea that the United States sort of pitched the world was that whenever the United States felt the need, they would randomly overthrow a democracy like in Chile or Guatemala or Iran,
Mm.
and periodically invade a third world country and tear it up, or do a proxy war. So,
Mm.
Vietnam or Angola, we didn't really. There was just sort of an understanding that when it came to resource extraction, the United States is going to be this new super empire that wouldn't leave a permanent army in your country, but it was still going to get your resources for cheap. In addition to that, we were going to have the US dollar be the standard for the world. So everybody would know that the US currency was stable. And as a result, transactions were going to be done in US currency. So the United States would kind of get a little bit of money every time there was a transaction, especially when it came to oil. Like if South Korea bought oil from Kuwait, they were going to do that transaction in US dollars. And so in a way, the understanding that the world had was that the United States would carry this extra wealth that they didn't earn, and the United States would even be allowed to amass a massive debt, both a trade deficit but also an actual debt to banks, and it would be tolerated. That the rules wouldn't apply to the U.S. That the United States would operate a cutthroat capitalist system, but itself would be insulated from the worst of those, uh, at least the rich and at least the state. Like the people would you couldn't make your house payment, you'd go bankrupt. Too bad. We don't care about the workers. But the rich and the state would be protected from capitalism. And all of a sudden, Trump has dumped the system and he said, I want more. That
Mm.
this isn't enough. Our greed is unsatiated, and you guys are going to have to start really putting out now. And I think the answer is that it's made all of the US's allies rethink their alliance, rethink this arrangement. Like Germany has had it in its mind that it could not remilitarize because the United States would be there in case the Russians came after Europe again. And now Germany's thinking, okay, we have to do this on our own because even if Trump only does 2 terms, he's already indicated he wants to run for a third term, which is unconstitutional, but who's going to stop him? Even if Trump doesn't run for a third term, and even if the United States goes back to having stable presidents, how long will it last? At some point, the United States will elect another Trump. And I
Yeah.
think the world has realized that the United States is no longer this stabilizing force. It's become a force of chaos. And it's crazy because it feels to me like there were these children that had this multi-billion-dollar inheritance, and they went, you know what? We don't want it, and set it on fire. Nobody knows why.
Well, look, taking that dose of pessimism, things are kind of looking up for Zelensky and Ukraine. The
Yeah,
US mineral deal doesn't quite look as toxic as it did prior to that White House ambush
yeah,
of Zelensky. But and then the same might not be said of Trump's relationship with Putin, because I don't know. I posted something on a LinkedIn network. I was cogitating this morning over a cup of coffee, and I thought to myself, "There's something weird going on here." It's not about policy; it's about behavior. Now, follow me while I try to unpack this for you. My thought was along these lines. So Trump is a narcissist. people like Putin and Netanyahu are more sociopathic. There is a degree of narcissism in both of them, but they think that they had Trump at their heel. They thought that they could
Yeah.
use him like a meat puppet, basically, right? And get what they wanted. But I think someone must have been whispering in Trump's ear saying, you know, Vladimir and Bibi really don't like you. Oh, here, have a piece of paper about the latest transcript that we overheard with these guys saying really nasty things about you. When you say this to a narcissist who believes he has godlike powers because he inhabits the White House, that must have cut him very, very deeply, if that indeed was the case. So, something of this nature must have affected his relationship with Ukraine and Zelensky because he was so tight with Putin and
Yeah.
almost tighter with Netanyahu. So, I mean, unless Putin turns up against all expectations, he turns up in Istanbul with a serious peace proposal, or maybe buys him a derelict space shuttle or something. I don't know what will turn Trump back onto Putin, but it's got to be pretty spectacular. How do you see, current moves toward a Ukrainian-Russian ceasefire play out if Putin now is the guy on the outer? Because once a narcissist has been crossed, he doesn't come back. He will never look at Putin as an equal or someone to admire. He'll look at someone to kind of quietly detest and keep him down. So has Putin burnt his bridges now with Trump based on this narcissistic personality disorder?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I find Trump sometimes difficult to read.
Yeah,
It feels to me, this is, just feeling, there's nothing scientific
mm.
about this, that Trump expected Putin to make a deal with Zelensky already.
Yeah,
And Trump had promised on day one there was going to be a deal, and here we are past day 100, and there's still no deal. And I feel like maybe you're right. Transcripts of some conversation were leaked to him, but I also think that there might be a little bit of why haven't you done this for me? I
yeah,
need
you're
you to
right.
come
Yeah,
through for me,
yeah,
and you
yeah.
haven't produced. So now I'm mad at you.
Mm,
And again, I don't really know. It's just a feeling based on trying to
mm,
read this guy. But he's
mm,
so chaotic and unpredictable
mm.
that he could easily flip. Like I could see him in a month, suddenly he's with Putin again
Yeah.
and Zelensky. I'm going to make a prediction. I think he's going to turn on Bibi, on Netanyahu and Israel over the next few weeks, and he's going to
Hmm.
start talking very bad things about Israel and Netanyahu. And then,
Hmm.
who knows, in 6 months, they'll be best friends again. And
Yeah.
I just think he's that guy. He has no memory,
Mm,
and he doesn't care as long as he's getting something out of it and his ego is being stroked. I think that's
mm.
the only thing he cares about, like a
Well, now that you're
$400 billion.
Yeah, yeah. Well, now that you're sitting in in the Middle East, I'm wondering what your observations are about his Le Grand Tour of the Gulf
Yeah.
states. I mean, he was given an F-15 escort, a horse escort when he was in the presidential
Yeah.
limousine. He walked the purple carpet for kilometer after kilometer. So I'm just wondering. Okay, so he signed off deals left, right, and center. They don't seem to be deals that will benefit America. Little elements of America, perhaps Boeing. If all of a sudden they get a nice fat contract to build planes for Qatar, that's great. But what are your expectations of this trip? What do you think that Trump hopes to get out of his love-in with the Gulf states?
So in his first term, he started his presidency with a tour of Saudi Arabia, and President Sisi came from Egypt, and they did that
Mm,
Palantir thing, and they tried to talk to
mm,
Sauron.
mm,
It was one of those moments. So he's sort of repeating that. Here we are. He's doing a Middle East tour. The Gulf states know how to put on a good show. I mean,
oh,
at
they
the end
do.
of the day, yeah, if you want to have your ego stroked and you have any kind of power,
Right.
I don't have any kind of power, and I have been given really nice treatment, and it
Yeah,
feels good. Like
it
your
does.
ego is like, oh wow, people think that I'm cool. This is great.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so obviously Kushner is going to expand his business options in Saudi Arabia. You know, his business is very deeply tied to Saudi Arabia, so this is great for him. I don't think that the United States necessarily is going to get anything meaningful out of this. There is a deal that the UAE has put forward to invest a lot of money over the next 10 years in the United States. That certainly won't hurt the U.S. economy if that deal happens. I believe he's here today. I'm in the
Mm,
UAE right now, and I believe Trump
mm,
is here right now.
mm,
I haven't really been keeping. I checked the Daily Show so I can get my news
mm.
input
I
because
watched
that's
that
the
too, by the way. It is.
most reliable news source in the United States. I love
Amen,
Jon Stewart
brother.
so much,
Yeah,
and
me too.
then John Oliver, like the two of
Yeah,
them.
yeah,
It's like,
yeah.
oh, I have information finally. Because our ABC isn't like your ABC.
Oh, look, honestly, if you want a snooze fest, watch our ABC. Your ABC is just a cut above, but that's a story for another time. But yeah, look, it's interesting. But what's the vibe like in the UAE? Is there a sense of optimism that Trump is going to do something great for the Emirates?
So the UAE is playing, you know how people are always talking about Trump is playing
Mm.
multi-dimensional chess.
Oh
I
yeah.
feel like that's actually what the UAE is doing. Um,
Yep.
the UAE just joined BRICS. It is a close ally of the United States. It works very closely with the European Union. Like the
Uh,
UAE is friends with everybody. And they've pulled it off in such a way that I think any foreign power can end up here in the UAE and they will feel welcome. They will feel at home.
Yep.
It doesn't matter
Yep.
what you've said or what you've done.
Yep.
And, and at some level, it feels like a master class in diplomacy, but what the UAE is pulling off.
Agreed.
Um, yeah, it's spectacular to watch. And so for me, I feel like the UAE is going to come. It's going to say, "Look, we want it. We want to make deals. We're ready to make money. We want to help you. You'll help us." It's perfect. I talked to a friend of mine who's a businessman in 2023 about this. So this
Mm.
is 2 years ago. When I asked him point blank, I said, "What is it like doing business with Americans?" And he said, when we first started really doing business with the US, when they started to finally have interest in us, which is probably late 70s, early 80s,
Mm.
uh, they would come and they would ask for the sun and the moon. And
Mm.
we would give it to them because we thought we were building a relationship and they'd come back next year and then we would get a better deal. And we'd never see them again. It was a
Yeah.
one-off transactional event and they just pillaged and walked away. And
Mm.
he said, when we interact with Europeans or the Japanese, we know they're here to make a long-term relationship.
Mm.
He said, the Japanese won't even sign a contract until we've invited them to our house and they've had
Mm.
a home cooked meal with our family.
Mm.
And he said, which we understand because right,
Yeah.
Arabs are very similar. And
Yeah.
he said, but with the United States, we know it's all transactional. We know it's a one-off deal. We know no relationship will be formed. And so I think the UAE is very aware
Mm.
that how to do business with the United States and that it doesn't mean anything in 10 years. It's we're here now, we're gonna make a deal, everybody's gonna make some money and then we're gonna go away.
It's interesting because on this particular itinerary of his in the Middle East, he's missing out on going to Israel, although there seemed to have been quite the breakthrough when he was in Saudi Arabia, because he did say that he was happy to meet with the new Syrian president,
Yeah.
ex-jihadist, which could be a good thing, could be a bad thing. In Syria's case, they've had it bad for a long time, so probably anything is an improvement on where they were. But how is this seen in the Gulf? I know that Syria has long been the checkerboard of interest between the Iranians, the Arabs, the Israelis, the Turks. The Americans, the Russians. Everyone's had a go at it and tried to put their pawns all over the place. But how is the new Syrian leadership seen from the Gulf perspective? Is he a man to be trusted and supported? Or is there some sort of subterranean thing that we in the standing from the outside looking in aren't being witness to?
Yeah. So it's complicated because there's only so much we know, right?
Yeah,
There's a little bit of an information gap here.
yeah,
So Shah, when he pulled off what looked like a military victory, a military miracle, when
mm,
he took out the Assad uh, regime, um, he had been for years prior to that toning down the jihadist stuff. He had
mm,
changed the laws. He'd gone out of his way to invest money, for example, in repairing churches.
mm,
He got rid of mandatory hijab. Like he really toned down all of the jihadist stuff for years. It wasn't like he did it instantaneously as a PR stunt.
mm, mm,
Um, his organization was originally at war with the Turks. He went to the Turks. They worked out a deal, and they ended up becoming allies. He is seen, I think, as hopefully a moderate. Like he will be a moderate force. It's unclear. We don't know. He might
mm,
go back to his jihadist roots tomorrow, for all we know.
mm.
But I think everybody is sighing a sigh of relief because he's not an ally of Iran.
Yeah,
And the minority ruled Shia government of Syria is now a majority ruled Sunni government. So I think there's this hope that he'll keep things toned down and he'll sort of reintegrate Syria into the greater Middle East as a non-Iranian vassal state. Having said that, he's also in a horrible position. He's inherited a state that has been in civil war since 2011, right? 14 years of tearing itself to pieces. Infrastructure is in ruins. The economy is in ruins. He needs money. He needs capital. He
mm.
needs it, 3 months
Yesterday.
ago.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah,
and so he's going to be completely reliant on the Gulf states because the Gulf states are the only regional guys that have enough money to fund him. And so he will do what they want. Saudi Arabia and UAE have gone out of their way to put themselves on a secularizing trajectory, especially
yeah,
UAE, but Saudi Arabia as
mm,
well.
mm,
Qatar is sort of holding its position. It's not as interested in being very secular.
mm,
So he has the option of, trying to lean more on Qatar and maybe less on UAE and Saudi, but he's going to still need them. So
yeah,
I think that the hope is that he'll become a force that is reliable and useful and moderate. And it's obvious that the Saudis told the United States point blank, we need you to help
mm.
us uh, stabilize the state. The last thing that anybody needs is for Syria to plunge back into civil war.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
stabilizing Syria, I think needs to be the top priority.
Mm,
Um, we'll see, how it works. I'm always a little bit of a skeptic, so
mm,
I'm not
mm.
sure.
Oh, your skepticism is well placed, Roy. I'm a skeptic as well. But one thing that I'm really skeptical about, and that is Bibi Netanyahu. Now, of course, in his multiple offensives against jihadist and Iranian interests within Syria, the IDF has managed to seize a piece of ground very close to the Syrian capital, Damascus, which gives Israel, I don't know, I suppose strategic depth so close to the Syrian capital, it kind of holds that high ground now, in a almost like as if it's a hostage to other things moving forward. If the new Syrian government were really wanting to have that territory back, I can see that this is where the rock that will wreck the Netanyahu Trump tag team permanently, because I can't see how Netanyahu, who's so wedded to the idea of pressing their military advantages, is wanting to give up that territory, because it is like a gun held to Syria's head if the IDF is
Very true.
forward positioned there, using the Druze and protecting the Druze minority as the cover for what they want to do, which is territorial aggrandizement, Greater Israel.
I mean, it really it strikes the average Arab's mind the way that the Crusades did. Because the
Mm,
Crusader states, no matter how many times the Arabs went to the Crusader states and went, keep Jerusalem, we just want to have a peaceful relationship with you. Can we trade instead? No matter how many
mm,
times the Crusaders always attacked.
yeah.
And that's I mean, the Abraham Accords signed, the next thing you know, the Israelis are doing another round of genocide and
Mhm.
expanding their territorial reach in Syria. The land they recently added, right? They already stole land from Syria, the Golan
Mhm.
Heights, in
That's right.
1967. The land they added is along the Lebanon border, and if you said heights because it's literally the slopes of mountains, um,
Yep.
and it definitely is meant to be a threat to the Syrian state, because if Syria does something they don't like, they're just right there, great
Yep.
artillery position for Damascus.
Mm.
Um, but it also feels like it's this, like you said, this greater Israel thing. There's this desire to make Israel bigger and more powerful. How many times have we heard ministers in the current government say we are going to destroy the entire population of Gaza? They will be confined to a thin strip. I don't know if you've ever looked at a map. Gaza's already a thin strip.
A thinner strip then.
Yeah, thinner
Yeah,
strip.
right.
I was living in Austin until recently, and if you put the southern tip of the Gaza Strip at the southern tip of Austin, the northern tip is at the northern tip of the city of Austin. And Austin is not the biggest city the world has ever
Yeah.
seen. So
Yeah.
the population of the Gaza Strip is about twice this population of Austin. So it's a densely populated area. In any case, it, I think the Israelis have made it very clear, and Europe is starting to find itself stumbling here a little bit, that their ultimate goal is to ethnically cleanse the rest of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, to grab a piece of Lebanon if they can, to expand their territory in Syria. And they're this permanent destabilizing force because they're constantly bombing Lebanon and Syria.
Mm.
If this was any other place on the planet, right, they would be constantly hammered with war crimes and crimes against humanity for their actions. And the United States acts as the shield and never lets that happen. But can you imagine if you had a neighbor who was just randomly constantly bombing you?
Mm.
How is that not a declaration of war? And the fact that states like Lebanon and Syria just simply have to accept it. There's nothing they can do to stop this. There's no military solution for any of this. They just have to accept the abuse.
So, in your opinion, um, will the Abraham Accords stand upright to all this Netanyahu-inspired violence? I mean, obviously, as I said earlier, he's wanting to press military advantages in Gaza and elsewhere in the Middle East. Trump is America's peace president, or at least the guy that doesn't want to have American forces entangled in foreign wars. To me, that seems like there's a huge break just waiting to happen. How do you see that? Do you think that the Abraham Accords, the initial glue that sort of tried to bring Israel in from the cold, is now dead in the water?
So I don't think it's dead in the water. It's in a coma
Mm.
on life
Okay.
support.
Yeah. Almost dead in
And
a.
almost dead. Yeah, it's bad. Uh, the reason I'm not saying it's dead is because I can't read the future. Like there's the
Mm.
possibility something will change dramatically. The whole
Mm.
idea behind the Abraham Accords was the world doesn't care about the Palestinian population anymore. They've even forgotten they exist. It's over. We have to accept that there's never going to be a Palestinian state. How do we make it so that Israel can basically be integrated into the Middle East and stop bombing everybody? And maybe someday in 50, 100 years, maybe 150 years, justice will happen for the Palestinian people. And the thinking was,
Mm.
if we can integrate Israel in economically and show them that we're not anti-Jewish and hell bent on hurting them, their trauma level will slowly come down. They'll
Mm.
calm down and they'll stop reacting in this paranoid, violent, militaristic way. And then
Mm.
at some point, their conscience will kick in, and they'll go, "Oh my God, what have we done to the Palestinian people?"
Yep.
That was the hope, and the thinking was it was going to take decades, maybe centuries, but eventually there would be some kind of solution. When October 7 happened, it the Israelis reacted in such an over the top, insane, violent way, which, by the way, they're doing now again because the
Hmm.
ceasefire, they broke it and they're back to it all over again. And it reminded the world that the Palestinians existed and
Mm.
that. and then it showed the world what the Israelis have been doing all along. Now, obviously, the level of violence that they're doing now is greater than in the past. It's been this slow ethnic cleansing, slow genocide. It accelerated, but it was always there. So I think what's happened is the Arab states that are already part of the Abraham Accord and other Arab allies like Jordan and Egypt are hoping that at some point Israel will calm back down and we can try to get back to normalizing relations. Obviously, as long as Netanyahu is in power, I don't think that's a possibility.
Mm.
Um, but there's a huge population of Israelis who, obviously not a majority, but a significant minority,
Mm.
who are on the side of creating a just solution for this. There are people like
Yes,
Ilan
there are.
Pappé, for example,
Yep.
and
Yep.
they are working tirelessly and trying to get
Mm.
Israel out of the state of
Mm.
chaos. So that's the glimmer of hope. That's why I'm saying it's not dead. If
Mm.
there can somehow be an electoral shift, I don't know how in the immediate future, but maybe in the long run, and
Mm.
cooler heads can prevail, then I can see how the Abraham Accords could be sort of defibrillated, brought back into into life.
Well, look, all I can say is that we had the pleasure of speaking with Ori Goldberg, who also, like Ilan Pape, is very much in favor of a just settlement to this whole mess. But I don't know. I mean, I don't see Mara Gaza being a thing. Do you? I mean, do you think that 20-foot tall statue of Trump and Bibi and Trump sitting on the beach, bare-chested, sipping cocktails, that's a fantasy that we will never see.
Well, I want to see those bearded belly dancers because I feel like it fits the the anti-trans message that the Trump administration has been really pushing forward. And
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Interesting that. All right, so from one set of crises to another, India and Pakistan. So with tensions between India and Pakistan de-escalating as fast as they flared up, how much of that crisis was shaped by the global vacuum left by US disengagement, disinterest, or realignment under Trump 47?
Yeah, that's hard to parse out because there have definitely been events in the past when the United States was fully engaged.
Mm.
If memory serves me correctly, India and Pakistan have fought three wars against each
Yep,
other. And there's definitely been lots of violence in Kashmir prior to this. Um, I almost wonder if it de-escalated as quickly as it did because India and Pakistan realized there was no United States anymore for all intents and purposes. That, oh my God, wait a minute, we're on our own. We have to be adults. How can we bring this back down to a cooler position? Uh,
Mm-mm.
That's I'm probably totally wrong about that. It's just it makes me question maybe the fact that the United States is out of the picture. It didn't the two states realized they were in trouble, especially with Pakistan, right? Because it's relied so heavily on US support in the past.
That's right.
Um, it did escalate way faster than it should have, too. And it makes me wonder if Modi was doing that because, in the last election, he didn't do so well. Um, and so it makes me wonder if he's thinking about the next election and he's trying to, ramp up the people and get the patriotic, nationalist, anti-Muslim fervor ramped up.
Mm.
So if that's the case, then he never planned on letting it escalate past just a little bit of violence,
Mm.
which suggests cynical politics. But I think that's what the world has kind of devolved into: is that the majority of our politician class is just a bunch of cynical politicians who only care about the next election.
So that's really interesting because, in the whole India-Pakistan situation, they're two nuclear-armed states. They've got roughly equivalents in terms of nuclear weapons. They both have modern conventionally equipped armed forces. They have had a long history of violence. And, you would think that of all the places in the world, one would want to be on top of that as best as one could. But it doesn't seem like we've got a steady hand in Washington, D.C. anymore. I mean, I made the cynical observation that initially when Trump said, it's not up to me anymore, I don't want to be involved in this, I thought, okay, well, India, Pakistan, go your hardest, see what happens. Hopefully the mushroom clouds don't start rising from your respective countries. But then the cynical thought was, oh, hang on a tick, JD Vance has a wife. She's Indian. Maybe she whispered to
Yeah,
JD that this was a bad idea and you better do something about it. And so then afterwards, Trump comes out, we claim victory. We have got a beautiful peace. It's like, for God's sakes. I don't know, but I think that there must have been some sort of external thing that descended on the Trump administration to do something, or at least go through the motions of doing something. But anyway, yeah, who knows? It's an interesting
yeah.
situation.
It is an interesting situation, and my fear is that this isn't it. Like it's going to flare up again in the future, and at some
Uh,
point, somebody will make a mistake, and
yeah, yeah.
that mistake will be hard to come back from. And that's the problem with all the conflicts on the planet right now. And
Mm.
I think what you and I are experiencing is the thought in the past was, as long as the United States and the Soviet Union don't make a mistake. I know I'm aging us, but it should be
You
okay.
are.
Yeah, because the United States and the Soviet Union will try to bring things back to some level of calm.
Right.
And now we're in a world where there's no expectation the United States will do anything. That we're kind
Mm-mm.
of on our own now, and I think that's
Well,
a
well,
little alarming.
it's interesting. Our last guest speaker was Sir Richard Sheriff, and it was an interesting, very blunt, and actually quite scary chat that we had because toward the end, I asked him the question: Well, we're not a world at peace anymore. We are a world at war. Are we at war? And he couldn't give a very clear answer to that because, of course, he
Yeah,
did acknowledge that there are multiple parts of the world fighting each other at the moment.
yeah.
That we don't call it a world war, I think, is because we don't want to call it a world war. Because if we did, it would put a totally different gloss on things, which would mean that politicians around the world would have to scramble for radical solutions to obvious problems, and no one's wanting to do that. So let's just
No.
bury our heads in the sand, not, see everything going up in flames. Don't call it a war. Whatever you do, don't call it a war. And hopefully things will calm down and sort themselves out in time. Ugh, what a bloody situation. Anyway,
I mean, the Guardian just put out an article last week, I think it was, saying, has World War III already started? And
right, right.
to have this conversation going on is really alarming.
It is.
Um, and it'd be great if we could back away from this somehow. And it feels like there's no leadership on the planet that's in the position where it wants to do the hard work to make that happen.
And
And
and,
I
and
don't,
that you're absolutely right, Roy. But it comes down to another thing as well, another observation that I think you and I both have, and that is that the lack of leadership that we have it stands in stark contrast to the almost embarrassment of leadership that we had prior to World War II or even prior to World War One, where the people that were in charge, they may have been terrible in their own ways for their particular times, but there was a sense of rationalism that drove things even to the point of the world breaking, they could also pull things back. Whereas now there's a sense that there is no one at the helm. Things are breaking, and there's no one that we can identify in the international community. There is not a Churchill, for instance, or an FDR. Where are these central individuals? And do individuals really make that much of a difference in terms of international relations? I mean, I know that you and I would probably know about the strongman theory of international relations, where it's all about the leadership, and the leadership is the thing, the primary thing that drives stuff. And I suppose our emphasis on Trump almost, supports that view because we're focusing on the one man and what he's doing, and look at the world now. But if Trump is the anti-Churchill, do we get a Churchill-like figure or an FDR-like figure at some point as a counterpoint? And do they even exist in this generation? I don't know. I don't know.
I mean, I think people were definitely asking that question in
Hmm.
1939 and 1940 with
I have,
Chamberlain, and then we
yeah,
got Churchill. So
yeah.
maybe we have to go through some kind of process to get past Neville and get to Winston.
Well, that's it.
Um,
Mm, mm.
but in any case, yeah, this is a really weird world because, like, if to take it out of sort of this Eurocentric perspective, if you look at the post-colonial states like Indonesia, Sukarno, and
Mm.
Egypt, Nasser, and Yugoslavia,
Yep,
Tito,
yep.
India, Nehru, like there was
Mm.
Kwame Nkrumah from Ghana. uh, there was Patrice Lumumba from Democratic Republic of Congo. Like there were
Right.
these figures that were larger than life,
Yep. Yep.
and
Yep.
what happened to that? Where are those guys? Why aren't we seeing a world with that kind of leadership where, even small state like Ghana has this name that carries on for years? It's weird. I don't know what to make of it, and I don't know how we got in a place where we don't have that. I mean, I'm not saying there isn't good
Mm-hmm.
leadership on the planet. There is, but they tend to be relatively quiet and in small states as opposed to uh, you know, loud and in big states. And
And also
that's
they're disconnected, aren't they? I mean, at the moment, even if we can identify a handful of people that we would rather be in charge of things,
yes,
they
I
don't
can.
have a yeah, well, they don't have critical mass to affect anything. So
Yeah.
they're out in the middle of the Hoboken, US, or out in the middle of the Congo, and they don't have the capacity to rise forward and bring the people with them. And I think that that's a problem. That's a huge problem that we have to address at some point. But anyway. Oh,
So you asked a different question too, which was, is this an institutional issue or a leadership issue?
mm,
And the answer I think in those types of questions are always, well, it's both,
yeah.
because obviously institutions do matter. But one of the weird things is since Reagan, maybe even since Nixon, the United States has been undermining its own institutions, both
Mm-mm-mm.
domestically and in terms of international politics.
Mm,
So undercutting the power of the UN, for example, or undermining the World Court. And so one of the, I think, twisted ironies of all of this is after years of trying to push back against the institutions the United States played a role in creating, it has effectively broken the system that it created after World War II. And maybe because of the erosion of those institutions, we are now in a world where leaders do matter more than they normally would have.
I agree with that. All right, so okay, time for the mid-show break. I'm John Bruni, and you're listening to Sage International's The Focus podcast from Dubai in the UAE. We're speaking with returning guest Dr. Roy Casagranda, who, at the time of recording, is examining Trump 47 116 days in power. Feels like 116 years, but there you go. Roy, can you start seeing a pattern in Trump's behavior regarding his foreign and strategic policy? He growls, he barks, but when push comes to shove, he's happy to back down. After all, he doesn't want to be seen as the president of war, as I said earlier, or the president that entangles the US in foreign wars. So when we look at a place like Iran, for instance, it's kind of unlikely that Trump will blindly follow Netanyahu into an air campaign to dethrone the Ayatollahs. Or do you think that Trump can be trapped into a broader Israeli war to cut the head of the snake and destroy Iranian power and influence in the Middle East?
Yeah, I don't know is the answer. Because one of the things I find interesting is that Netanyahu is insistent on getting US permission to attack Iran. So
Yeah.
he's constantly begging, but he won't do it until he gets that permission.
Mm,
And it's been decades. This didn't just start. He's been
mm,
trying to attack Iran
mm.
for, maybe it's
Ages.
not 30 years, but it's close to
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
30
yeah.
years. And so on the one hand, it clearly isn't so important to Israel's survival to attack Iran if we're talking about decades, right? There's
Mm,
no, if it's a real emergency, he should have needed to have done it 20 years ago, and he hasn't. So it makes you wonder what the real agenda is in constantly saying we need to attack Iran, we need to attack Iran. The Islamic Republic of Iran is an authoritarian state that's cruel to its own population,
mm,
have zero love or sympathy for it. But at the end of the day, I think they have zero desire to go to war with Israel and to have a war with the United States, just because so much is at stake and so little is there to gain.
mm,
So if that's the case, then why does Israel feel this need to do this war? It almost looks like this irrational trauma created, like there's a boogeyman and I need to run away from him kind of
mm,
situation, or I
mm,
need to attack him preemptively.
mm, mm,
Um, but again, it only takes a mistake, and Trump came close to his first term making that mistake when he killed General Soleimani in Iraq. what happens is when the president says, I need to do something, his advisors bring him a series of ideas, and one of those ideas is on one end of the spectrum is it won't do much. And on the
Mm.
other end, this is a really extreme idea that we probably shouldn't do. And then there's sort of like this bell curve feature. You should probably pick one of the ones in the middle. So killing General Soleimani was on the please don't do this. This is crazy. It might trigger a war. And he picked that one. He kills him, and then he immediately gets up in front of the world and says, as long as Iran doesn't retaliate, we won't retaliate. And Iran
Mm.
immediately retaliated and injured something like 200 US military personnel on a base. And Trump got up and said, thankfully, Iran hasn't retaliated. We can move on. And, if you were watching that, you go, wait a minute, but Iran did retaliate. What was that? And so I think the world kind of learned Trump at the end of the day is a coward. He'll do something insane and then he'll run away from it. He'll say I'm going to do 145% tariffs and then he runs away from it without getting any concessions. Right? There's
Mm-mm.
nothing was gained from the threat other than the stock market crashed. So
Yeah.
all his friends had shorted the stock market, made a bunch of money. So that at that point, then you're starting to wonder, is he being given bad advice because he's being manipulated, or is he just not listening to anybody and he's just constantly going with his gut feeling? He
Mm.
knows nothing about the world. It's obvious when he speaks. He says the most ridiculous things. This is the greatest thing that ever happened. We've had a fantastic relationship with such and such country for the last 5,000 years. And you think, wait, the US is what, 250, 250? How did you have a 5,000-year-old relationship with this country?
Mm. Yeah. That was in the other dimensions that he also rules from
Yeah.
afar, right? Yeah. Yeah, look, you've opened it up to the tariffs, Roy, and I think we'll just double down on that just a bit. Okay, so Trump has won his tariff war against China and the rest of the world. I mean, he's taken off all the lunatic tariffs, except that China is still at 30%. The rest of the world's at 10%. I don't know what the sense of that is, but I'm sure that some economic genius will come out and try to justify Trump's move. But are we back to square one, or was there indeed a breakthrough in the US-China relationship, or did he do what I said earlier? He confabulated a crisis only for him then to walk back from that crisis and claim victory.
So if it could be that last thing, because right, that's been the Republican Party's MO for years now.
Hmm.
He was one of the people who said we should ban TikTok, and then goes, "I'm going to save TikTok." So he creates
Yeah,
the crisis, and then he solves the crisis.
yeah, yeah.
But before we go on, though, I did he really remove the tariff on Heard of McDonald Islands?
Oh no, I
I
think the Penguins will be suffering.
Yeah, I'm really worried about how much they're suffering. I love the formula they came up with to
Yeah,
create the size of the tariff.
yeah.
They looked at the trade imbalance and then they made up the number based on that, which of course is just, a magic number. Like, where did that come from?
Ninety
Uh,
percent for Cambodia. 90%. It's like, what do the Cambodians ever do to you? It's like, what? Oh my
So,
God.
it, so from the beginning, the whole scheme of the tariffs was just irrational because it wasn't based on anything economic. And then when you consider the fact that the United States, the irony of this is the United States has a trade imbalance. Let's solve it with tariffs. Well, the consumers are going to pay for the tariff. So it's
Right,
really you're just taxing the consumers.
right.
And that doesn't solve the trade imbalance. It just means that Americans will buy fewer things. And then it means that those countries that were selling those items are going to have to find new markets. And they're
Mm-mm.
already working on that, right? The Chinese
Mm.
have already been divesting from the dollar. The Chinese have been pouring money into Africa.
Yep.
The reality is that the world has been shifting away from the United States. So pulling out these tariffs just accelerates it and then
Mm-mm.
triggers trade wars. So when Trump won, he did that. He attacked the Chinese in the trade war. The Chinese were, I don't know if they were the biggest importer of pork and soy, but they were one of the biggest importers.
Mm.
They just simply moved that production to the Philippines. They moved that production to other countries. Well,
Mm.
they'll never go back and buy that pork and soy from the United States. That's the end of that. Because why would they? The labor in the Philippines is cheaper. The soy and pork they're buying is cheaper than it was. There's no
Mm.
incentive. the transportation is cheaper. There's no incentive for them to ever come back to U.S. markets. So
Yeah.
one of the things that's problematic about what Trump does is they are frequently permanent consequences. This isn't,
Mm-mm.
I threatened something and now I can back away. It's I threatened something and I hurt something and I'll back away because I'm a coward, but you'll get nothing out of it.
Trump's tariffs on all imports, especially the sharp ones that he placed on Chinese goods, had been sold to protect and expand American industry. But as you rightly point out, the tariffs would be probably insulating American industrial inefficiency to a degree, because
Yeah.
that's what tariff does, right? Tariffs
Yeah.
cover up all your inefficiencies domestically, so you protect them, and they're able to just chug along. And of course, this passes the costs on to ordinary American consumers. And I can't understand how ordinary American consumers don't wake up to the fact. I mean, especially those 11-year-old girls who love their 32 dolls.
They just need to. Why are you buying them so many dolls?
That's right, maybe five, 2 to 5,
They 2 to 5,
maybe
yeah.
5 or 6. And sometimes
Yeah,
it's the 15-year-old girls. I don't know.
right. Good point. And think of the 250 million lives that Trump has already saved in the United States from fentanyl overdoses.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, no,
Yeah,
he's right
they're
up
going to
there.
need dolls. They're going to
Yes, they
need
will.
dolls too. So one of the crazy things about all of this is even if the United States wanted to bring back some of that industry and wanted to bring back some of that manufacturing, we're talking about maybe decades before the infrastructure could be created to do it. It's
Mm.
certainly not going to be within the Trump administration. And so, and then who's going to be in those jobs? Like, what person in the United States is going, man, I really miss the assembly line. I can't wait to have a mindless job where I do the same motion with my hands over and over and over again.
With those
Yeah,
tiny little screws, I just want to start doing that. That's all I dream for it, Roy. I dream for
I
that, don't
dream
you
of
worry.
it. I dream of it. And
Yeah.
I'm like, I can't wait to be paid $10 a day. This is going to be amazing.
Yeah.
What are they thinking?
uh,
He's going to
just
bring jobs back.
Yeah. Oh, you know what I love, though? I'm sure that our audience has seen it a number of times now, but the Chinese had released their own propaganda video
Yeah.
showcasing obese Americans on a production line, stitching shoes and stuff, and it's like this was such a gift to Chinese propagandists. I can't imagine how America walked straight into that one. But anyway, they
Yeah.
have. They're going to wear it. They're going to wear it. Okay, so I mean, the last thing on the whole trade deal imbroglio, if you don't mind, the UK-US trade agreement signed under Trump 47 was touted as a Brexit victory lap. But beneath the rhetoric, who really benefits from this deal?
Yeah, I don't honestly know. I suspect at the end of the day it'll be the U.S. that'll walk away with
Yeah.
the better part of the goods. But maybe the Brits did something clever that I'm missing.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't heard anything from this part of the world, so anyway, we'll keep that one on ice for the moment. Now,
Yeah,
now,
I'll
I
wait till the results, then I'll predict what happens.
yeah, absolutely. I think that many people in Britain will do exactly that too. Now, Roy, I've got a beef to pick. Now, I'm from the traditional centre right in Australian politics. And I find myself increasingly alienated by what's being passed off as the political right today. How did we get to a point where MAGA in the US and its kindred movements across Europe and elsewhere hijacked and ultimately derailed what used to be serious value-based conservative politics?
I wish I knew. So
Me too!
when I was a kid going to college, I had two professors that I was really close to, and one was a liberal and one was a conservative, and they were best friends. And I I disagreed with both of them on multiple issues, but more with the conservative than the liberal. Like I agreed with the liberal professor a little bit more. They were both about the same height. They were both about 5'3", and their names were shockingly similar, Lutz and Lentz. And I loved them to death. They loved all their students. They didn't care what your ideology was. It
Yeah,
just didn't matter. And
yeah.
I didn't think that because I disagreed with them, they were immoral, vile scumbags that deserved to
Mm,
be killed. I
mm,
thought they're just seeing this issue a little bit differently than I am, and I can learn from their perspective. And it doesn't hurt me to be, influenced by these other ideas. And
mm,
the conservative professor, he died of cancer pretty young. Uh, and I went to this cathedral. He had packed that cathedral. I went to
mm,
for the ceremony. I cried like a baby.
mm.
I remember a time where it didn't matter really whether a person was what their ideology was. You could still be friends with them.
Yeah.
It was just, you saw it as a different issue.
Mm,
I feel like somehow the world has gotten to a point where we don't trust the what the other person is thinking is good. We think that there's somehow a bad person because they think differently than us. And I
mm,
want to
mm.
get back to the old way.
Yeah, yeah. So
This
do I.
doesn't,
So do I.
this is crazy.
Mm,
This is
mm.
crazy land.
Yeah.
And somehow in the process, so many people that identified as conservative have been pulled so far to the right.
Yeah.
And now I think we're starting to see a rise in the left. The last German election, not the one that just happened, but the one before,
Mm,
Die Linke, the communists, got 4.9% of the vote. They almost didn't make it into government. You're supposed to get 5% unless you win. I think it's three districts. Then you
mm,
can, even with less than 5%, you can get in. And they had met the threshold for the three districts. They got into government. Everybody was saying that's the end of the communists. They've aged out. There are a bunch of
mm,
East Germans who were reminiscing, and they're all too old and they're dying, and the new generation wants nothing to do with it. They just doubled their vote. I think they cleared 10% in the last election. So all
mm,
of a sudden there's been this rise of communists in Germany. So the AfD doubled their vote. They're now 20%, and the communists are 10%. That's 30% of the population has been radicalized. And so that's what happened in the 20s and 30s. Like, my alarm bells are going off. This
mm, mm,
radicalization leads to uh, more violence. Don't get me wrong. I think there
mm.
are profound fundamental flaws in capitalism, and I think that there are some serious issues in the way we allow wealth to be distributed. But I think that we solve those by getting together and talking and compromising and
Mm.
negotiating and making deals. We bring labor and corporations to the table and we work things out.
The
You
whole
don't do it.
FDR New Deal, right? The whole FDR New Deal was predicated on that, and that was really the first shot at US superpowerdom, if you will. It was the ability
Yeah.
to compromise, bring diverse elements of your economy under the one roof, and let them work for the betterment of the country. And I don't understand why that isn't an attractive proposition. And again, my situation here in Australia was when I was in the Liberal Party, I was a bit of a weirdo because I liked the old style mixed economy. I like a bourgeoisie that's healthy because I think that the middle class can moderate the two extremes, the wealth and the poverty. But I had all these other people around me who really were dyed in the wool economic rationalists. They wouldn't listen to me. Oh, the old mixed economy, those days are over. Get with the program, John. We're going to have to, slash and burn and privatize everything. And it's like, well, okay. So now they've had their run. They've slashed, they've burnt, they've privatized everything. Our services are more expensive than they've ever been: water, electricity, power, whatnot. And here we are, having cost of living crises from Australia to the United States to Canada to South Africa. I mean, no country is untouched by the great economic god Milton Friedman, and
Yeah.
I'm not happy by it, but I don't see what else we have as an alternative because again, in the 1930s, it was an interesting period which is missing now, and that is it didn't matter where you were on the political spectrum. Because I mean, Mussolini came from a fascist, no, from a socialist background before he became
He
a
did, yeah.
fascist, and so those extremes on the right that developed in the 20s and 30s after the Great Depression, they were happy to play around with concepts, borrow this, cherry pick that, slap it all together and see what happens, right? We're not doing that at all now. We're going down with the ship. There's no one out there
Yeah.
going, hey, there's another economic model that still allows you to be rich and have money if you want to go down that path, but it's also going to be fair and equitable, and you're not going to have masses of impoverished people to worry about, and it's going to be a much better society overall. Where is the the experimentation among our shattering classes. I mean, there are a lot of people who talk the gloom talk and the doom porn, but they don't do anything to try to rectify the system. You know what I'm saying?
No, yeah, I totally agree. I mean, that's why the Democratic Party lost the last election in the United States, is they were not trying to fix anything. They were just trying to keep it status quo.
Yeah, yeah.
And it turned off so many voters. Now, obviously, a bunch of those voters are now regretting it because they're thinking, well, the status quo was better than this.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I, in the United States, this is more true than in other electoral republics. The enthusiasm of the voters really matters because the United States, we were in presidential election years, we're frequently running 55% voter turnout. So your goal as a politician isn't to convince a voter. Your goal as a politician is to somehow motivate them to go vote because
Hmm.
you've got enough voters. The problem is that they're staying at home. And that's what Trump successfully did, is he got his base to go vote, and Harris couldn't get her base to go vote.
Yeah.
And I mean, she did. She only lost by 1.5%, but if she had lost by 10 votes, she still would have lost. So she just couldn't motivate her people. It was because of this. I think at the end of the day, what happened was, in the United States anyway, in 1973, by 1973, Nixon had gotten through enough of his economic reforms that he began to turn the US in the wrong direction. And the United States was becoming increasingly more and more egalitarian. The distance from the poorest person to the richest person in the United States was shrinking. And 1973 was the high water mark. The top 1% made 8% of the income that was made that year. Um, Today, it's more than 40%. So we've gone over the course of the last 52 years, the United States has become increasingly more and more hierarchical. The United States economically looks way more like the year 1900 than it does the year
Hmm.
1973 right now. And people are pushing back against that. The problem is they're trying to reconcile their belief system with their economic reality. And they're thinking, my parents were doing so much better than I am. And then they don't want to admit, oh, maybe I'm wrong about X or wrong about Y. And I think
Right.
they've gotten into cognitive dissonance, and that's pulled them in one crazy direction or the other. And I think that's
Hmm.
the problem, that people are stuck trying to make all their beliefs somehow match, and it's not working. In the case of the Republican Party, you know, they were constantly creating these crises and then trying to fix them so that they could look like the heroes. And I think that caught up. It was a great tactic for the next election. It was catastrophic for 40 years out.
Yeah.
And one of the things that the Republican Party successfully did was it cut education funding in the United States across the board. And here we are 40 years later going, oh, that might have been a mistake because that
Hmm.
10-year-old's 50 now and voting,
Yeah.
and they don't know anything. It's a disaster. Um, it's making me realize that countries that have done a better job with education, which tend to have better electoral outcomes, have proven that an educated public is really necessary for a democracy to function.
Yeah. I also think that perhaps there's, in terms of encouraging political and economic experimentation, that's risk taking. And at the moment, we're living in a very risk averse environment.
It's
A
true.
lot of our givens, the homes that we live in and the jobs that we have and so on and so forth are on a knife's edge. And, we don't want anything to risk that fragile environment. So we do nothing and hope that things will sort themselves out without our participation, without a direct participation. And I think that that's actually quite sad, but
But I mean, this is the reason to have states, or to be more, to use the term correctly, provinces that most countries now call states.
mm,
Like if you have 50 different states, you can have 50 different economic experiments. And then
mm,
one of them is bound to have better results, and one of them is bound to have terrible results. And then you can go, oh, let's do that. The
yeah,
terrible one, of
yeah,
course, because that's
yeah.
our impulse. And
Yeah.
but I feel like that's not the case anymore. What's happened in the case of the United States is there are the blue states and the red states, and there's two models, and
Mm,
neither side is interested. Usually, there I can think of exceptions of experimenting with the good ideas from the other side because they've become dogmatic.
mm,
And
mm.
That's also a mess.
Okay, now before we officially wrap this up, I have one official question to ask you, and one question from our audience who chastised us lovingly, of course, that the last time you were on, we didn't attack a particular issue, which is climate change. So before we move on to climate change, as we assess the first 100 days and slightly beyond, what legacy is Trump 47 beginning to forge, and what might this indicate for the remainder of his term and beyond?
Drill, baby, drill. Right.
Yeah.
That's been his motto. He's rolled back all of Biden's economic. I'm sorry. Environmental policies. For the record, it wasn't that Biden had done anything spectacular. He
Mm.
probably did, like 5% of what needed to get done. But that was amazing because no previous president had done any percent of what needed to get done. So we went from 0 to 5%. He had to at least do a little dance for that.
Uh,
And Trump hasn't completely undone everything, but he's definitely done a lot of damage to Biden's legacy for what it's worth. So I'm having a hard time with where we are in terms of the environment, especially because we're seeing the results. Like it's impossible to be in denial anymore. I know that there's always going to be
mm,
that one person who's so cognizant, so and such deep cognizant dissonance that they can't see it. But
mm,
the vast majority of the world can see it. They're experiencing it firsthand. Temperatures are rising, storms are nasty, right? The wildfires are burning Canada to the
mm.
ground. Australia burnt to the ground recently as well.
Yep.
It's
Now we're
impossible to
drowning.
stop.
Yep.
Now you're drowning, which is the
Yeah.
which is the great thing about this. It'll be one thing or the other, but it'll never be
Mm.
the same thing twice.
Yeah. Yeah. Variety is the
Yeah,
spice of life, right?
I guess so. And the world doesn't seem to have any serious desire to fix this, which makes no sense because, from a business standpoint, from a personal standpoint, we should be pumping money and energy and time and effort into at least slowing global warming down. Um, if if you have a business that's based in a place that's overheating and you're going to have to relocate, that's going to cost you a lot of money. So
Mhm.
at some point, where I think where we're stuck is everybody's thinking short term and people aren't thinking long term, and they don't care. It seems about the long term. Like I don't know what's going to happen in 2 years. I'm going to party like it's 1999, and that
Mm.
that that mindset is exactly why civilizations cease to exist. They crash and
Yeah.
burn and get replaced by a better civilization or at least a different one. And
Mm.
so I think that's the path we've decided to get on is we're just going to let it burn to the ground. The front line states in this, UAE is one of them, Australia
Mm.
is another.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
uh,
Mm.
California is obviously on the front lines. South Africa, they're going to really get hammered over the next few years. And I don't know why there's people aren't in the streets rioting. I guess they want it to get worse to motivate them. But if you're looking for food, you're not going to be rioting. You're going to be too hungry. I, we don't want it to get worse. It's time to start fixing this. It's too bad the United States doesn't have any global leadership anymore because the United States could have been that guy. And
Yeah. Yeah.
poor Biden, everybody was mad at him, but the dude was so old. It was amazing. Every day he didn't fall down the stairs, I was like, well, it's a good day. And the fact that there wasn't any young leadership to have taken the role of president is shocking because you think,
Yeah.
why?
Yeah.
Why wasn't there somebody out there?
But it's funny. I know I was no fan of Biden, but I mean now that we have Trump, I appreciate him from afar. The thing the problem that I find now is that people tend to dismiss Trump's age as a factor, and then when I see him snoring his way through a Saudi briefing, I think to myself, this 78-year-old, I think that all of the so-called travel itinerary that a president should have. I mean, that's a younger man's game. You don't put people of a certain age in positions of authority, not unless they're like, I don't know, Bernie Sanders, and I don't know what drug he's on, but Jesus, I want some of that. Because for a guy that's almost 90, he's like an ever-ready battery. He doesn't know
He
when to
is.
quit, and he's
Yeah.
articulate. He actually makes sense when he speaks, which is very strange because really coming from the political right, I get rather disturbed when I listen to Bernie Sanders and think, wow, I wonder what he'd be like as a president. But anyway, Roy, look, I know that you're pressed for time, and I really appreciate that you've spent some time with us. Thanks for joining us once again and for sharing your insights on the focus. And we'll do this again
Thank you for
soon.
having me.
No
Please,
worries.
that'll be fun. All right.
Indeed. From Dubai in the UAE, that was Professor of Government at Austin Community College, Dr. Roy Casagranda. Thank you for joining me, John Bruni, for today's episode with Roy Casagranda. Check out the links in our show notes to learn more about Roy and connect with him on social media. Now, on to questions for the audience. Trump 47 has unleashed a wave of tariffs and executive actions. Do you believe these moves are about restoring US strength, or are they accelerating America's global isolation? Traditional conservatism is being overrun by populist nationalism across the West. As a listener, where do you stand? Do you still recognize the political right? With India and Pakistan once again on the edge, should the US still play global referee, or is stepping back the smarter move in a multipolar world? Let us know in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's a free way to support us. You can also subscribe to the podcast on the Auscast Network, iTunes, and Spotify, where we'd appreciate your 5-star reviews. Do you have comments or questions about the podcast? Post them into the comments section on YouTube, and I'll do my best to respond to as many as I can. My thanks as ever to the producer of The Focus, Neil Smart. Please stay connected with us on social media. Follow me on X at BruniDoctor, and follow The Focus on X at TheFocus_Sage. And on Blue Sky, on thefocuspodadl.bsky.social. From Adelaide, South Australia, you've been listening to The Focus.